Welcome to Solving the Conflict. This is your host, Benjamin Sklar, and today's special guest is Daniel Viner. Daniel is a former roommate of mine. We lived together in Israel when we both made Aliyah to join the army. And Daniel has stayed over in Israel, and he's currently a special forces soldier in Givati, which is a battalion that has been serving in Gaza. Daniel spent over 6 months recently in Gaza and over 2 months in the West Bank near the city of Jenin. And I asked him to hop on the show today so I could learn from his experience. We all could learn from his story. So thank you very much, Daniel, for hopping on the show today, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. First of all, it's really good to see you, good to hear from you. It's been a while. Um, and so Benji actually has a bit more of a history in my family than just me. He actually ran through all my siblings. First of all, he was my brother's roommate at Birthright Excel for a couple of months, and then he was my roommate, and then he was kind of sort of my sister's roommate for a while. He was dating her roommate for a bit. So all the Viners know Benji really well. Um, Great times, really, really good times. We had a good few years in Green Sabar at the absorption clinic where they had us living. Um, and so, yeah, a little bit about myself. Um, I'm currently serving as a reservist. I guess my reserve rank would be sergeant major um, in the reserve unit of the recon battalion of Givati. So each of the infantry brigades has a recon battalion, and that battalion's job is to kind of mark targets, map things out, kind of prepare the field for the entrance of the larger general brigade, and it can do that in a lot of ways. And so that is what I did when I was in my active service. I was in the explosives and demolitions unit of that. I guess a version of that kind of would be like Force Recon for the Marines. Like they're the guys that kind of go a little bit ahead of the Marines. So it's not like Delta Force or anything crazy like that, but you do kind of have to crack the tougher nuts as far as the battle space is concerned, generally speaking. Um, and kind of prepare the field for everybody else to kind of come in behind you. And that's something that we took a lot of pride of, and we were quite busy during our active duty. Over the past year has been insane. Um, so we were supposed to have an operational deployment right around the time of October anyways. So we were kind of, we had kind of reached everybody that was around. The gear was kind of already set up. We were preparing within like a few weeks of the 7th to go into the West Bank. There were intelligence indications that the West Bank was supposed to heat up and there was supposed to be something big there. Um, Part of the reasons why Gaza didn't get the attention that it deserved at the time. If you want, maybe later in the conversation, we can go in at a bit of a ground level what my opinions of what happened on that day are. And so when the 7th hit, um, my unit was just like a little bit more prepared than the average. Um, and so before we even got called up, I had already called the team and we were all already, speeding on the way down. And by the time we were more than halfway there, we all, we got the message and we're like, okay, so it's legit. Um, it's crazy thinking about it now. I surprise myself when I remember it. I don't know if that makes sense. Like it feels like it was a movie I haven't watched for a while. You get kind of detached from that kind of stuff. Um, Super intense. Um, but the way I go about talking about it, to not dive too deep into the weeds unnecessarily is I tend to have people ask questions and I give as honest an answer as possible, and we kind of see where things go from there. Because it's a pretty intense rabbit hole the past year as far as the personal experience is concerned. It was quite intense. Yeah.
So let's walk through it, if
Yeah,
I
sure.
may. Take us
Yeah, no
back to
problem.
October 7th, 2023, and what was that day like for you? What did you do? And move forward from then.
Okay, so lazy morning. I tend to wake up pretty early as it is. Um, and in Israel, we've become quite, I mean, especially after this war, but in general, we've become quite desensitized to flare-ups, let's call them. Um, and so, I was aware at the early hours of the morning that something was happening down south, but putting aside nothing could have prepared me for, what the next few months would hold. Um, but not every time, they shoot rockets, you necessarily think you're in the middle of an existential war, So it took some time. By 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, I realized that, just talking to the guys on the group chat, just getting updates, seeing pictures on the news, I realized, okay, this is getting quite serious. I was hearing on the radio that the military spokesperson wasn't able to answer the reporter on how many settlements were being invaded at this point in time or at that point in time in the morning. And I thought that that was insane. Um, when you're operating in the Israeli military, having the upper hand in intelligence, having a better battle picture than virtually anyone else in the battle space is something you get used to. Um, and hearing that we didn't know the answer to such a critical yet basic question. I mean, that's when this I hit the switch. Um, and anyone who's ever operated or competed in contact sports or stuff like that knows what I'm talking about when I say hit the switch. I mean, like I'm playing now. Like I'm like Dan, regular Dan is put in a certain kind of a box and like it's game day. Like I'm on the field. And so things happen pretty quick because that's why you train, that's why you practice, that's why you plan ahead of time. And so I guess this can kind of translate, into business or into many other things in life. If you have that discussion ahead of time and you make those decisions as best you can ahead of time, things click into place. Because there's a saying, you don't rise to occasion, you fall back on your training. And I think I mean, in my experience, that's statistically true. Um, so things started clicking and I started reaching out to the right people. The average reservist already has, I mean, now it's even more so, but before the war, we had a bag of our stuff, that as soon as you come back from the last deployment, you clean everything and you fold everything and you prep it and you put it in your bag because look, chances are I'll have a pretty good heads up when I'll get deployed next, but it could happen at any time and I want everything to be ready. So like everything was already ready. The amount of time it took me from the moment I realized that like, okay, I need to get involved to the time I was in the car, I don't know, maybe it was a half hour, maybe max. Kisses and hugs. And I'm driving down, there's already checkposts on the way there. Don't text and drive, but I think that when, your country's being invaded, I think it's allowed. And so I was, making it happen, getting people organized, arriving to the staging area, getting the equipment, and then we realized that we have shortages like you wouldn't believe. Um, because when you deploy somewhere, you use the equipment of where you deploy to, and when you just kind of respond, you have your own. It's different sets of equipment. They're stored in different places. And so the equipment we had for war was not good to go all across the board. Um, because the way that we were supposed to respond in the amount of time it was supposed to take us to respond, had anything gone normally, was supposed to be, the logistics hadn't had a chance to do their thing. Um, and so I mean, we got the very basics together, and it got to the point where when a team was ready, you sent them in. When a team was ready, you sent them in. Whoever was ready first. And because we had done a bit of the planning ahead of time, we were one of the reserve units that were ready the first. And we got sent to Re'im. We were there before sundown. Um, to those who don't know, Re'im is a couple hundred meters from where the Nova Music Festival happened. Um, we'll get to that in a bit. Um, and so we arrived to Re'im on a bus, which is not the way I'm used to arriving to a combat zone. But I remember right away seeing tons of cars. I mean, every couple of meters, cars on the side of the road. And I guess I hadn't realized where I was at because I had like we showed up to the gate of where Raim was. Raim had already been captured by Palsar Tzanchanim. Palsar Tzanchanim is the recon battalion of the paratroopers that you were part of. They had already taken it over, and there was a whole huge story if people are interested to what happened to them in Naim, but I didn't know any of that going in. And so we swapped them out, and it was chaos, man. I mean, things were blowing up every few seconds. I mean, it could have been a tank, artillery, Katyusha rockets, mortars, explosives that we were setting off because we were an explosives team. Yalom was in the area and was setting things off. I mean, things were just blowing up like crazy, and you develop an ear for things with time, and I hadn't developed that yet. So it was just these different explosions, different things have different sounds. And it's to the point where, like, just to give you an idea, like, mortars falling in the middle of where the unit, where the team is spread. I was I guess a company commander. I was in charge of 25 guys in the beginning of the war. Um, and so like things were falling in the middle of where we were spread out, and like everyone was fine. Or you would like run up to like the wall of a house, and like a rocket would hit like in the living room, like the other side of the wall, like a rocket. There was a guy I had to send home because that shook him up. That shook him up pretty bad. I mean, and you see, you see strewn all over the streets, um, raw crime scenes is the way I would describe it. Um, it's an accurate description, in my opinion. And so we needed to turn the town into a fort. Was essentially the mission that we got, and to use that as a position to facilitate the entrance of other units to. It's called making the map blue. It's to take over territory and to push things forward. And so we needed to develop a strong enough position in order to facilitate and support taking over the settlements that were closer to the border. Because Raim isn't smack dab on the border; it's a few kilometers from the border. And then the forts that are actually on the fence. And so we needed to facilitate that. And so I was making fighting positions out of refrigerators and tearing furniture up and just trying to develop, if it wasn't going to stop bullets, at least it would hide us, types of positions. Um, and shifting them because I wasn't happy with the way things were set up. I had radios that were working, not working, so the communication was very, very poor, and you have very little situational awareness. And as an Israeli operator, you're used to fighting with an abundance of information, an abundance um, to the point where it's too much information, and you have to kind of whittle it down to see what's relevant. And so having nothing is not something that you're used to. And so it's really just like, old school, shoulder to shoulder, the guys next to you for indescribable periods of time. Time just kind of stands still, and you just try to like last from moment to moment. Um, and uh, and there was still a couple of terrorists, not many, hiding around in the town. There was an instance where one jumped out of a sewer, uh, tried to choke me and take the weapon. Uh, my battle buddy shot him 6 times. I don't know how he didn't hit me. That was intense. After that happened, we just opened everything, every locked door, I mean, the unit got control of the town, so the whole unit just opened everything they could think of opening to see if we could find more of them. And then, so in the first hours, days of the fighting, we couldn't get Zaka to the party because it was in active combat zones and there was a ton of explosives around and terrorists, and it was a war. And so one of the things that we do as a recon battalion is we map things out, and we prepare the battle space, we prepare a space. And so we were asked to prepare that space, the space where the party happened, to do what we know how to do. Initially, uh, uh, scan it for combatives, and then marking on the map and isolating, weapons and explosives, and identifying. And by identifying, I mean locating and marking out bodies and Most of it wasn't even bodies. Uh, wasn't that much of it. Uh, I mean, and you see varying levels of gore going all the way to the extremes. Um, Different varieties too. Um, I didn't watch the video. Uh, my wife did. I told her not to. I understand the need to, I understand the need of having that be seen. I think that those who've been there and seen it, that kind of stuff scars your soul, man. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Let's put it that way. If you don't have to. Though I did understand the need of others to kind of like have an understanding of what happened, and to the extent of what was done. Um, and I mean, again, I haven't seen the video, but I've heard it being discussed enough. I don't think it even comes close. Uh, I mean, it was taken to the most extremes. I mean, I've seen it's, I've seen bodies before, but when it's random, it's one thing. But when you see that like a person put effort, thought into it, it becomes something totally different. And anyone who's dealt with crime scenes knows that, I mean, it may not necessarily paint a full picture, but crime scenes, they tell stories. And the people that were down there in the first days and hours saw an entire career's worth of crime scenes for a police officer in a couple of days or hours or however long they were there. I mean, it was a lot. Piles in some cases, literally speaking. Um, but you had to work, and I had a team to run, and that really helped because when you're focusing on something, when you're focusing on others, there's a saying in the army that when you're pushing someone up that hill in a march, it makes the march easier for yourself because you're not focusing on your own hardships. And that was really true. That really helped because I really love my guys. My guys, we've been together for a decade more or less. The guys I'm with, the team I'm with in the reserves is the team I was with from boot camp. So I mean, you smell a fart in the wind, you know who did it. You know these guys really, really well. Um, and I was worried about them, and I was worried that they didn't have the gear that they needed, and I was worried if they were strong enough mentally, because we were briefed by psychologists before we went to the Nova, and we're giving some tips and tricks. You can go into them if it interests you. Um, and so I was focused on that. I was focused on like doing the things the psychologist told me with the team to make sure that they didn't get messed up. Um, and so it kept me from focusing on kind of what I was doing. Um, like I was focused on the task, but I wasn't like, what am I holding right now? You know what I mean? Um, yeah, so that was intense. Action movies, they tend to peak with time. I got hit with like the peak right off the bat, just like a rusty civilian guy. The last time I put a uniform on was a year ago for a couple of months. Actually, the funny thing is the last time I'd done reserves was not even a full year before. Um, in the Sufa base, Mutsav Sufa, and Mutsav Sufa got whacked very hard, very bad. Some of the Tatzpitaniot, some of the girls that were captured from Sufa. Um, and I was there a few months before. I mean, we knew that we were understaffed, but we didn't realize how much we had our pants down. Um, so that was the first few days, and that and so we pushed forward to Nir Oz and Ashlosha, Magen. Magen was a really good experience for me because Magen was one of the only kibbutzim that actually fought the terrorists off. They had a battle. The Each village, especially in those kinds of areas, has a volunteer rapid response group. These are like, ex-combat soldiers that in a community level with varying levels of gear at that point in time. would prepare to protect the settlement in case there was a breach. Never in their wildest dreams did they think that they would get a breach of that size. But being with them and living there for however long we lived there. So the weird thing is, I'm remembering as I'm saying it, it's crazy. It's only been a year. So it was a very absurd war in the beginning. Um, so you're in a fighting position in like on the outskirts of a village, and it's important to develop in addition to a fighting position, a backwards position, a position in the rear, to kind of let the guy's hair down, as they say, because he can't be 100% all the time. You need to take a step back and recoup and recover to whatever degree that could be possible. So in the first hours and days, it was let's roll you back like not even 100 meters so you can take your helmet off and lay down. You know what I mean? Still with your gear, still with your boots, but like at least like look up at the sky for a second, because nobody was sleeping. Um, Before we roll you back up into the position. And so the those rear positions were people's houses. Um, and so it's super weird living. I mean, we tried to be as respectful as we could. We closed all of the bedrooms and the private spaces, and we tried, sleeping on the floor in the living room. Um, try to respect it as best as possible, but you're like sleeping on the floor in somebody's house. And so, like, you also don't expect to have amenities in war, like filtered water and a shower if we wanted one, and like, you know what I mean? And uh, a couple of hours after going into our first house, the head of the security response team of Re'im showed up. It was his house. He lost his friends, people in his town they were supposed to protect got killed, and he shows up to his house. He also got shot in the arm. He refused to get evacuated. This guy has like a bullet in his arm. I mean, as intense my day was, his day was so much more intense. And he comes home and he sees like 20 guys sprawled out all over the center of his house, and he was like, shit on my floor if you need to, eat my food, whatever it, I love you guys, you're here to protect me. And I was like, moments like that saved my soul. I told my wife the first time I really ever spoke to her about it, that in war you see demons, but you also see angels, man. You see them both if your eyes are open. um and that was super powerful for me, and it really kind of saved my soul. And I'm not it's super rare for me to talk spiritually. You lived into me. I've never ever spoke that way before. um but in those moments, those things develop power in a way that they don't in the day to day. um and I saw a bunch of demons this year, and I saw a bunch of angels this year, man. I saw them go at it, and angels seem to be winning, in my opinion, at least on the ground. um And so that was great. Being in Magen was amazing. Being with those guys, the Kitat Konenut, the that response team, trying to help them out, trying to help them get gear. At the same time, we're fighting. It sounds so weird saying it. I'm also on my phone in the moments that I wasn't in forward positions, texting, trying to get donations together, trying to get gear together, trying to get things because I felt like my guys were naked. Um, you know, setting up a group chat for the spouses and telling my wife, like, take charge of that. And so I can send you unified messages because I don't know what the phone situation is going to be. And like, you can disseminate that out, and let's make sure that like the wives don't worry too much. So there's a million things going on all at once. And so being busy really, really helped with like coping with whatever that was. And by the time I had a moment to like take a breath and just kind of like digest what I saw and what I did and where I was, I mean, I was in it for 6 months, but at some point, things calmed down. It was like it was significant, it was much later, and so time heals, I guess. Like time kind of takes the edge off. Um, so after about a few weeks, a month of um, taking over the settlements, taking over the forts, getting the border back to where it originally was. The border wall had been breached in some like 80 places. So there was no border. And so essentially what we had done is we had established a new border. So all the towns became forts. We kind of build positions there, um, to the point where now, I mean, they actually, with time, they actually built more forts. But in the beginning, it was, old school digging and sandbags and I remember the first time we actually touched the fence. It was crazy. Two open Hummers, machine gun on top, full gas to the fence, shooting, touching it, turning back, shooting on the way back to say we touched it. We touched the fence. Like the just developing. So part of, as they say, making the map blue is having a presence. And is so if you need to drive by to have a presence, and if that's what you can do, then you do it. Because if you don't attack, you get attacked. That offense is the best defense. And so the first few weeks were really weird for me, not only just because of the intelligence, but because I was defensive. I wasn't used to being defensive. I wasn't used to not knowing. I wasn't used to being, like the kid getting whacked. I was used to the one doing the hitting, surprising others, knowing what's going on, having them be in shock. And so establishing that took time. Um, and then we started facilitating the big entrances into Gaza, preparing the field for that to take place. So raids at night to identify things or prepare things or to blow things up. We're an explosives and demo unit, so explosives tend to be our solution to most problems. Um, and then and then it was a mixed bag of all kinds of stuff because there was a shortage of explosives and demo guys in the military. So um, the whole brigade was doing one thing, but we at certain times would get called to do other things and to join other units. And it could be as four-man teams or as like a full 15, 20-man teams or four-man squads, I guess, or 20-man teams or as the whole unit, and it wasn't always necessarily linked to what the actual brigade was doing. So we were getting sent to a whole bunch of different spots, Jabalia, Khan Yunis, obviously, Khirbet Takhzea, Rafiah, all throughout. I mean, Rafiah was way, way later, obviously, but so a lot of that to me personally becomes a blur. I personally, I never wrote it down. I have a hard time remembering exactly where in Gaza I was exactly when. I knew the city was first, and then Khan Yunis was later, because Khan Yunis also had its big epic entrance that we facilitated. That was a complicated. It was a complicated night. Um, uh, but yeah, man, 6 months in and out of Gaza from October to around April. And then the day after kind of comes and you like return your gear and you hop back in the car that you parked in the desert next to some base for 6 months and go home. Try to do whatever it was you were doing before. I tend to call it my first 6 months, I tend to call it to myself, I call it the war. We're still in the war, but that first 6 month chunk to me was yeah, man, was my little war. So from here on, I feel like I'm starting to ramble. Just start asking questions, man,
About those
because
6 months in Gaza, the war. What was your day to day like? What did you see?
so it depends. I mean, you're not for the whole 6 months in there. You go in, you could go in for in the beginning it were raids, so they were pretty quick. And then they grew longer and longer in time as time progressed, a few weeks. Um, I mean, what's it like? Everything is completely destroyed. It's hard to imagine that, people were living there before. Almost every house has either some kind of weapons, some kind of storage, production, intelligence, fighting position. I mean, um, we are getting a lot of flack from the international community of about how much collateral damage has been done. And a lot of that is backseat quarterbacking of people who, A, don't know what fighting is, period, let alone fighting in an urban setting, let alone finding in an urban setting, in an urban setting that has been rigged for years to cause as much collateral damage, civilian casualties, and if they can hurt you along the way, that'll be great for them as well. Just fighting through that massive booby trap of a place is insane. It's a slow, methodical. It's not a sprint. A day could be a couple of houses. You take your time. Um, Most of the time, they weren't putting up too much of resistance when we were moving somewhere or doing a thing. There were certain pockets where that happened, especially in the hospitals. Um, Mosques tended to be points of interest. Municipalities tended to be points of interest. UN or NGO facilities tended to be points of interest. I mean, they took this tactic and it really worked out for them, where they knew that they weren't going to be able to beat us tactically and strategically, but they knew that they were going to beat us in the court of international opinion. Um, and that portion of their strategy worked. Where the strategy didn't work is, I guess not enough of their allies joined them in the way that they thought they did, and they underestimated the resolve of Israel or the ability of the international community to stop us. Um, but they didn't put too much fighting up as far as like preventing us from getting anywhere. They did try a lot to take pot shots at us, hit logistics convoys, stuff like that. Um, Most of the time I wasn't necessarily fighting a determined entrenched enemy. Um, a lot of use of drones, a lot of use of cameras, a lot of use of booby traps. We also stumbled on insane amounts of weaponry. I mean, what's happening in Lebanon, they're finding even more, which I can't even imagine, because the amount of stuff that we were finding in Gaza was insane. I couldn't. That was beyond my expectations. At a certain point, you got used to it, but you would open up a door and you'd have like knee-high rockets laying down, like the tubes taking up the majority of the room, just like a random room. The fins on one side and the cones on the other, and you can just like imagine these guys just like screwing this thing together and popping it off. A lot of times they would make holes in the cement and lay it down and shoot it from inside the house. Um, Lots of tunnels. We were able to identify and destroy a lot of them. That's a big portion of what my unit does as well. Um, they would discover a tunnel somewhere and then they'd call us up and we would make sure that we would at least plug that hole. That was one of the main things that we were doing. Because you don't always go in. It's very dangerous and it's extremely dangerous and resource and time intensive, and it just wouldn't be realistic to go into every single hole you found. And there were times that we missed holes. There were two famous incidents. I'm sure most of your listeners are aware of the incident with Idan Amedi, where the truck blew up and he got hurt. He's a famous actor slash musician. Most Israelis are aware of the incident, and it killed a bunch of people. And then after that, there was another incident where my unit was involved. We were rigging two houses to explode. And the terrorist operative of Hamas popped out of a hole, I don't know, maybe 100 meters from the house. We actually have his GoPro because they release everything. So we have his point of view, which tends to be pretty unique. Modern war can be really impersonal. Um, we saw a lot of bodies, but we didn't necessarily like see the whites of the guy's eyes all the time. I mean, I don't know. Gaza was weird because it was you either didn't see him or you were right on top of him. There was kind of no in between. Um, like playing tag. It's funny. My English suffers after being a decade in Israel. Machboim im hashluchot chamurot. It's a hide and seek with dire consequences. You know, that's what urban combat is. So just imagine playing hide and seek, but like if you get found out, you die. That's a portion of it. Um, if he sees you before you see him. or shoots you before you shoot him. And I've had it happen where a guy jumped out at me with like this jumbled together thing that kind of looked like a Carl Gustav, and it clicked and it didn't shoot. Uh, and I was in like a pretty tight alleyway, you know what I mean? So like it wouldn't have taken much. You get moments like that, man, where it's like, I don't know, people were praying for me, for sure. Um, but you get moments like that with the, you know, um, a bunch of that. Um, but I was telling you before, so there was an incident where we were setting two houses up to explode, and the guy popped out of the tunnel and he saw that we were doing something in the houses, and he saw there was a tank nearby, and so we shot an RPG at the house and set off the house because um, the house was at a stage of setting it up to explode where it was quite sensitive. Explosives, at least in my experience, they have levels that you need to put together. So the big piece that makes the big boom is the least sensitive. And then you have a really small piece that if you squeeze it hard enough, it'll pop, but it's tiny. And well, and then you have the in between, and it sets up a chain so that the big thing that can do a lot of damage, won't go off if you sneeze. The little thing is really, really, really sensitive. So the house was rigged to the point where it was sensitive. I mean, and it ain't an RPG, so I mean, that's not that sensitive of an implement. I mean, it set off the house. It set off the house right next to it. We lost half a team instantly before you even have time to react. I mean, I can show you videos of the way these houses were blowing up, and they weren't being demolished. We were blowing them up. Um, we did 3 months of demolitions training, and so they teach you how to minimum material, maximum effect. They teach you how to actually have it collapse. But in war, you don't want to have to go back into a house that you blew up half of it because you didn't get the job done. So you always do more in war. So it ends up being that you send it up. So these two houses were sent up, and then he sent another RPG at the tank and killed the guys in the tank. And this was a spot that like three brigades had gone through. Like the army was there for a long time, relatively speaking. Um, and we just didn't find that one. You know what I mean? And it's not even, I lost five pretty good friends. Uh, really great dudes. And like you don't even necessarily have any, like nobody really made a mistake. I mean, you can always go back and say this could have been better and that could have been better, but realistically speaking, like nobody was delinquent about anything. And 21 people disappeared, that happens too. And it's not like nobody was praying for them. So, there's a bunch of that. There was a bunch of, I spoke about meaning, but there was a bunch of meaningless stuff too. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine was shooting a grenade, like an underslung grenade. So you have like the rifle, and under it you have like a little grenade launcher. Thump. He was trying to get it in a window, and he hit the wall next to the window. And a piece of shrapnel, hit a buddy of mine in the face right between. So we have ballistic glasses and we have a helmet. It got to a point we were able to get the gear together, and he got hit right in the middle, half his body. Uh, and that's random. That's Try to find the meaning in that. Really young guy, really great guy, super strong. I mean, if anybody could plow through that, talk about hustling. The name of your other podcast, hustling. Homie hustled before that even happened. And he just kept hustling, and he's plowing through it. He's walking with a cane now, and it's incredible. But a lesser man would have half his body knocked out for probably the rest of his life, and that's kind of meaningless too. Where's the meaning in that? So these are questions I kind of wrestle with, trying to find the meaning, or sometimes, telling myself don't look for it where it ain't. Yeah, man. 6 months in Gaza.
Tell us about your experience in the West Bank near Shechem, Jenin.
Yeah, so the West Bank was a totally different animal for multiple reasons. First of all, during peacetime, the West Bank is where a lot of combat units go to kind of like cut their teeth, as they say. Um, it's 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 kind of the most generally active hotspot of all of them, in the sense that there's things happening. They don't necessarily make the news because they happen so often. It's not even really news on both sides. It's a very complicated patch of land. There's even the way it looks on the map is really complicated, but it was a different animal because I knew the West Bank. I know the West Bank. West Bank is very familiar to me. Even before I became so in my unit, it's like kind of a year and 4 months, more or less, until you like, or yeah, a year and 4 months until you get into the unit of training. After 8 months, you're already doing arrest missions in the West Bank. You've already done enough training, and so they give you that experience even before you've become like a fully, I don't know, accredited operator, if you want to call it that. And when you're in active duty, so I had a lot of experience with the West Bank. And the West Bank flared up this year, relative to the baseline, but no way near compared to what it has in the past. I mean, even in my personal past, and no way near what we thought it could. And I'll give a little bit of context. The Iranians, in my humble opinion, realized that shooting missiles intercontinentally was causing them fadichot, was causing them shame. Um, and Hamas was being wiped out, and Hezbollah was in the process of being wiped out, and they were losing their cards. And the tried and true terrorism seemed to be a pretty good route for them. And leading up until the holidays, a lot of resources were being funneled into the West Bank from Jordan. And there was a big risk, kind of coming full circle. I started the year with a deployment that was supposed to be in the West Bank because of resources that were being funneled there. And almost a year later, that's where I found myself actually deploying to. And so our mission was to ensure peaceful holidays for the Israelis as best we could, getting the weapons as best we could off the street, getting certain individuals as best we could off the street. I mean, it was to the point where if you made the wrong phone call to the wrong person, you were getting a knock on the door and like, a finger wagging. We were very serious. And all kinds of other things. I mean, there was, a major battle in Jenin, major battle in Shechem. Um, but we were pretty successful. I mean, not 100%. There were a couple terrorist attacks that did take place. There was a shooting at the train in Tel Aviv, amongst other incidents that unfortunately we've become somewhat desensitized to. But that's what we did. Um, at that point in the war, I had started a new position. It's kind of like a field intelligence guy for the unit. Um, Helping develop packages, I guess target packages you would call it, and and getting out into the field as much as I can, because in my opinion, being out there is the best way to learn what's going on. And I was a lot with the Bedouin guides. So in Israel, there's a special unit of Bedouin soldiers. There's another one of Druze soldiers as well, that they're these like tracker guys. These are people that grew up in the wilderness and they know how to track and they know how to read the dirt and I don't know, smell poop. I'm kidding, they don't smell poop. And so these guys are pretty hit or miss. They're either insanely good and are like earth whisperers and can just like, I don't know, like Native Americans can just, I don't know, it's insane what they know and how much balls they have. And sometimes they're not. But they stick around. They're there for a while. They really, really know the area. And so I made sure to go out with this Bedouin guy as much as I possibly could. And so this guy gets called to all different kinds of things, and he kind of like, susses it out, make sure, are there tracks, are there explosives, stuff like that. I mean, and this guy would walk right up to an IED and like, deal with it with his bare hands and be like, this is that. And like, this guy was insane. Uh, Also like walked around as if he was the sheriff. Like everybody knew him as far as like the Palestinians in the villages, everybody knew him. He would just like walk into any house he wanted to, and they would like offer him coffee. He'd sit down, and he'd start asking people questions, like old school Western sheriffs in town. He had a pretty good relationship with most of them. Um, so I was like, half of the time in the office doing strike packages and half of the time out in the field with this like crazy Bedouin guy. Um, and at night doing arresting missions and stuff like that, facilitating that as much as I could. Um, but that
Strike,
was
what's a strike package?
so it could be a short PowerPoint of where we're going, why are we going there, who's there, a little bit of information about him, why is he important, stuff like that, you know.
Got it. I know what you're
Something to
talking about.
give a decision maker um so that he can understand the scope and depth and then be able to plan and make decisions accordingly. And it depends on what the mission is, and it depends on how much time you have, and it depends on how many of those missions do you have that particular day, or what resources you have at your fingertips. I'm talking about it very amorphously because it can be amorphous. It also depends on the unit. It depends on a lot of things. But essentially, it's kind of like a mission statement. It's like, where are we going? Why are we going there? Who's there? What's there? What's it look like? And somebody looks at that, and from that, he can be like, okay, so I want to go this way, and I want to go that way, and I want to bring this, and I want to take this guy, and I want to make sure to not go there, and you know what I mean? Stuff like that.
Nice. All right,
Yeah.
so are we done talking about your experience in the West Bank, or should we? You want to finish it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't go into a lot of detail about that because it was almost routine. I mean, even in comparison, definitely in comparison to the first 6 months and how intense they were. But it was something that I knew, and something, I mean, even you've had experience in the West Bank. Most combat soldiers at one point or another get sent to the West Bank. Even if it's to just, stand on, and like a check post and make sure that a bus stop doesn't get rammed or whatever. Um, most combat soldiers have been there. And so, you know, you're not home, and you're in a dangerous environment, but it's not on the scale intent all across the board. It was it's funny to call it that, a more mellowed out experience than the first 6 months were insane. Um, yeah, you know.
So now what? Where are you going from now?
I mean, beginning of next year, we're talking about going back to Gaza, in the corridor. The word is skipping, Netzarim, the Netzarim corridor. Um, I'm not really sure for how long this time, and we'll take it from there at this point.
Mm.
Which it's living in Israel at this point in time, especially as a reserve. It is you take it week by week, day by day, month by month. You know what I mean? You try not to, because there's a plan, there's a calendar, but I mean, it's funny. Like even today's an interesting day for us to be having this conversation because I had to go into the bunker 3 times today, and like I'm home. So even the center's routine can be disrupted even when I'm home. Uh, Israelis are insanely resilient. It's crazy managing. I mean, I've lived here a decade, so I'm not that surprised by it. But having the perspective as an American and how peaceful and quiet the United States can be, it's really hard I would imagine it would be really hard for the average person to grasp what it's like to manage a normal routine in Israel, um, anywhere, let alone every couple of months having to like, go to war and come back. See, for an American soldier, the experience is totally different because they hop on a plane, cross the globe, stick around for 9 months, and come back. It's a much more compartmentalized experience. Um, for Israelis, like you could be in an arrest mission and hours later be on a beach with a beer in your hand. It's a very drastic switch. And so the switch is the hardest part, transitioning. Transitioning there, it's like a not comfortable week, you're going to be pretty achy. not used to having all that weight on you all the time, and like you get used to not sleeping. The transition back is mentally significantly more challenging, you know, hard to manage.
Let's talk about Israeli society, Israeli culture. What's it
Sure.
like to be in Israel today? And most of my listeners, I would say, are Americans who
Hmm.
are our age, living in New York, Miami, and they're interested in hearing what you have to say because they're pro-Israel and want to learn about a soldier's experience.
Okay.
So take that for context.
Sure. So I'll answer a question that you didn't ask, and then I'll go and answer the question that you asked. The first thing that I wanted to say is the diaspora Jew is no less important than the Jew in Israel. I think that it's my opinion, but I think that that's something that's really important. Um, Especially now more than ever, because I had lived in the US as well, and I'd experienced anti-Semitism as a kid. I got whacked a bit. We can get into, I don't know, my hero's journey and how I, not that I consider myself a hero, but in the sense of how I like, left the home and decided to go on this quote adventure and become a soldier and make Aliyah and all of that. So I'd experienced anti-Semitism, but I think it's very fair to say that all across the world, it's been ratcheted up to a degree that it hasn't been in a very, very long time. Um, and I would gander to say that the Jew who wears his Judaism proudly overseas is no less a warrior than I was. If anything, he can be even braver because there's several areas of the United States even that I would not wear a yarmulke in as a proud Zionist. So when I go to Gaza, I use the word hero. I'm armed to the teeth with tanks and an airplane. You know what I mean? To a certain extent, one can say you need less bravery to confront an opponent with all of that. The average American in the United States, what he has to confront, um, oftentimes he's doing it alone, um, or significantly outnumbered. Um, and so I know what that's like. That's an unenviable position, and it to wear your Judaism proudly anywhere in the world takes immense bravery. Um, so I at length didn't answer your question, and so now I'm going to answer it. What's it like living in Israel? Generally speaking, Israel's awesome. I love Israel. I mean, I came here out of altruistic Zionistic reasons and all of that, and we can go into that later, but what kept me here is the people at the end of the day. Um, you don't make as much as you do in the States. So if you're used to an American salary, uh, that'll bite. So if I was to do the same job that I do now in the States, I'd make probably three times as much. Probably my base pay would be twice as much as I make like with bonuses. Um, um, I'm a laboratory equipment specialist. We can get into that if that interests you later. So you make a lot less. You have less stuff. Your stuff is less shiny and less big, but I guess that's relative because if everyone's got a Mustang, then like you're not that cool for having one. Um, to kind of make the comparison to the other side. So if things is your jam, or building an empire is your jam, which that's totally fine if it is. I don't know if Israel will be the place for you because it's a smaller pond. I mean, you can definitely make things happen here. You can definitely make money here, but with the same skill set in the United States, the opportunities are just significantly broader and vaster, deeper. Um, you know, it's relative. But the people here are amazing. The people are what really kept me here. I've developed really special relationships. The Israel is a melting pot in a very similar sense that it is in the United States, but it has that unifying factor that I have not felt in the US in a decade. Um, which I say that as a patriot, sadly. We have something that unifies us. We almost forgot that last year, by the way. We can get into that if that interests you as well. Um, Having that enemy definitely unified us. A similar experience is like 9/11. You can ratchet up how 9/11 felt the day after by a lot more. I mean, I lived in New York. Um, did you live in New York at the time? No,
Texas.
Texas. Dope. Um, So you really feel like you're part of a nation. And this year, to the umpth degree, in Israel, everybody just got together. To like from grandmothers making sandwiches to like a guy who I know who like has a store who just started importing gear, to a friend of mine who's a medical student, Ronnie, who got me like, casts and braces and chet ayin, how would you call it? Chet ayin, like if you, God forbid, lose a limb or have horrible bleeding, you can like it stops the bleeding, you tighten it. I mean, so I felt like I had the nation behind me. Really, really, really to the point. All across the board, people were showing up and giving us food, and you felt like, you know, where the average. I've friends in the States who served in the military, and they have feelings of alienation and abandonment, and they struggle with all those kinds of things in the States. I don't necessarily think the Israeli veteran feels that. I would say the other way around. They're in good company because everyone's kind of served. It's like part of small talk where you were in the military. Um, there's a saying, the army builds the nation builds the army, and you feel that. Um, I made Aliyah to enlist, so I guess it makes sense that I would look at it through that lens. But I mean, it really kind of like, unifies people, gives them kind of a shared experience, which I think is really important. You feel Judaism in the streets in the way you feel Christmas and Thanksgiving and Halloween in the streets, which is really nice. You kind of like feel the Sabbath to varying degrees depending on where you live, but you tend to kind of feel it everywhere. So if that stuff's important to you, that can be pretty special. Um, Israelis have this like seize life kind of a mentality. Like everyone's trying to have a good time, everyone's trying to be chill. Um, Israelis can be very serious, but they can also be very unserious. We can be aggressive, but the ice is very, very thin here. It doesn't take much to break the ice with somebody. In the States, people are significantly more polite, but the ice is significantly thicker. Um, these are just comparisons that kind of I'm rattling that come to mind. Um, but if the nation and personal experiences as a whole is something that speaks to you, Israel is definitely a place to be. But there's a cost, just like there's a cost for everything. And that cost on a regular year is the intermittent terrorist attack or the intermittent rocket strike. But let's say you live in Chicago, your cost of living in Chicago would be like the intermittent mugging, or every place has their stuff. In Texas, you've got hurricanes and tornadoes. When I talk to the average Israeli and they ask me, like, what are storms like in the States? Like they see like a tornado. Oh my God, we never get storms like that in Israel. I lived here a decade. The most intense storm I've ever had wouldn't raise an eyebrow in the US. It's just like rain. You know what I mean? You get amazing weather. It's like kind of California, like as far as the vibe. It's kind of a beachy country in its entirety because I don't think you're really ever more than an hour or two away from the beach. Israelis love to travel. They love food. They love music. Festivals like Nova are like mushrooms. I mean, people are setting up impromptu raves all over the place all the time. We have our own version of Burning Man, which is dope. Tel Aviv is a really cool city to live in. You lived right next to Tel Aviv for a while, so you can definitely vouch for that. Tel Aviv, it's kind of like the New York City of Israel. I mean, not definitely not on the scale and grandeur, but there's all kinds of things going on. It like if anything is worth doing, somebody will try to set it up in Tel Aviv. Amazing food from all over the world, because again, Israel is an immigrant country. Ethiopian Jews. I married a Yemenite Jew. I'm an Ashkenaz Jew. That's Eastern European. Um, the world talks a lot about exodus out of Palestine and doesn't spare a half a breath of significantly more people being exodused from Libya, Morocco, Yemen, Iraq. My aunt is Iraqi, half Iraqi, Lebanese, Syrian, all that stuff. Old Soviet bloc countries, um, the big Ethiopian aliyah. So, I mean, like my neighbors on one side are Americans, my neighbors on the other side are Ethiopians, and I'm like married to a Yemenite. So like, yeah, we're all Jews, but I guess you kind of get the best of both worlds. You have this unifying thing, the shared experience, the shared culture. Doesn't matter how religious you are. but you also have that spice of all those other cultures and musics and tastes and sounds, and it's a facet. It's super small, but it's super super dense. Um, as you can hear, I came a Zionist and stayed a Zionist. I really love this country. I think it has a lot to offer. I also think it has a lot to offer the world. We can go into that as well. I work in the in heavily in the science industry. I'm a laboratory equipment specialist. So I've worked with virtually all of the labs in Israel, and there's thousands of them of all kinds. That shit's fascinating. Cancer research, agricultural technology, food tech. There's 6 companies that are making steaks in a lab. I actually tried one, a company that's making breast milk without, mothers to try to tackle the formula problem. Um, Super, super cool stuff happening all across the board. But you're smack dab in the middle of the Middle East and you need to do military service. And every once in a while, you need to fight for your country to one capacity or another. Because we forgot, but we almost lost it, you know. Um,
Gaza. Where are
mhm.
we now? What's gonna happen moving forward with Gaza? What is the solution to the issue?
Okay, yeah, wow, getting down to the solution. Okay, so let me hit you with some bad news. Um, the question is how broad do we want to go? So I'm gonna start the most focused and then I'm gonna get really broad. Um, I like going deep. So as far as Gazans concerned, you're not going to have a pretty bow wrapped around this whatsoever, no matter what. A a lot has been said about policies trying to get the hostages or not get the hostages. All of that aside, 500,000 at least Jews trampled across every conceivable inch of Gaza for 13, 14. How long are we? Over a year turning over every single rock possible trying to find these people. I mean, everyone who was there, actually, forget the politics, forget the pundits, for 500,000 at least is Jews, Israelis were there from all over the world. My wife's husband, who served in Sayeret Givati also. He's living in Boston, Chicago, I'm sorry, came and served. I had a friend of mine from Germany came. I mean, anyone who could be there was there looking for these people. We did everything we could to find them. Literally, God knows where they are. I mean, in the tunnels, in the houses. So, I know that the families feel like they're not getting the attention that they deserve, and that portion of the mission is not is that portion of the mission hasn't been accomplished, and I don't have any good excuse for that. It's not for lack of trying, and I don't see that coming to any kind of a nice, clean conclusion in the next year. At a certain point, um, there is going to have to come a day after. And I think the day after is going to be sticky, messy, and complicated more than it was than the day before. You're going to have some kind of an Israeli military presence in there. You're going to have some kind of an international, I'm speaking so broad because literally anything can happen there. You're going to have some kind of an international coalition that's going to have to take over the civilian responsibilities. Probably Fatah, the Palestinian authorities, is going to get that mandate. And the world is going to wag their finger in our faces until the end of time because there's no way in hell we're going to give that piece of land and what that population is at this point in time capable of producing as far as leadership. We're nowhere in a million years we're going to give them anything resembling power. It's just suicide. It doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, where Israel is forced into a position where it cannot make the altruistic decision, there is no debate that the Gazan civilians have it worse than anyone else, anywhere else in this story. But they have agency and they have responsibility for the decisions that they made and the people that they've elected. Um, and as far as the hierarchy of needs in Israel, we need to take care of our civilian population first. So it's not going to go back to the way it was, that's for sure. So that's Gaza. I mean, I'm sorry if I don't have a good answer for you there, because nobody does. Literally, not a single person on earth does. And who knows what the politicians are going to decide when they decide. It's going to be a mess. It always was. It's going to be even more mess now. West Bank is going to stay as it is. Lebanon, we're going to pull out of there at one point in time. Um, and as far as Iran is concerned, I think unfortunately we're going to have a couple of more ping pongs. I think we're looking at checkmate in three kind of a situation, and they just keep taking the bait, um, and giving us legitimacy to do that next strike and cause that next bit of damage. They can't maintain that forever. There's going to be a couple rounds of that more max. So I think we're talking of about max another year, maybe another 6 months of things as we see them. But literally anything could happen at any time, man. I was surprised when they killed Nasrallah. I was surprised about the beepers. I was surprised about Sinwar. I mean, um, in the last few months, Israel has completely changed the equation. Israel has completely changed the situation on the ground, the dynamic in the Middle East as a whole. Empirically, strategically, this is turning out to be a victory, even though, um, as far as the trauma that the Israelis and the Jewish community as a whole feels won't make it feel like one. The fact that we didn't bring back all of the hostages won't make it feel like one. And the damage to the international standing won't make it feel like one. But empirically, strategically, there's no question about it. We've been mopping the floor with them at every turn, on all fronts. Um, and we got our shit together. It took us some time. And the Israeli today is significantly safer than the Israeli before the 7th of October. And it's a shame that it had to happen. And so this is kind of my answer, generally speaking. The Jews have a multi-thousand year repeating history of good times making us complacent. I mean, this you can also kind of take it into your life. Good times making us complacent, losing focus, and then we get whacked, we get punished, either by God or by the fact that if you don't fix your leaky roof, you're going to have a shitty winter. You know what I mean? If you want to send that to God or not, that's up to you. But it happens. It happens in spiritually, and it happens in the physical realm as well. That good times make you soft, and soft decisions lead to situations unfolding that you could have prevented, and you get whacked, and that's what happened. And you have two choices. And Israel is all the nation, Israel, I'm talking about as a nation, because a lot of our history, we didn't necessarily have a country, is all about looking inwards. Where was I wrong? Where did I make a mistake? How did I drift from God or from the proper way of being? And looking at the calamity as a potential lesson and strengthening from that and moving on to the tomorrow, whether that be the next generation or the next period of time. But, like any wayward son, we forget and we need to be reminded. And the 7th of October, just like Hanukkah and Passover, and it's going to get to the point where the entire calendar is going to be quote unquote holidays. But we keep having to be reminded, that we're special. I mean, whether God chose us or not, the world looks at us differently than it looks at anybody else. So we are, quote, special, and we're judged differently, and we need to be unified or we won't exist. That's a reality for us in the sense that it isn't for other nations. We're the international scapegoat. And if we don't look out for each other and if we don't follow the tenets, the basic tenets, um, and we get confused the way that we were confused on the 6th and on the 5th, we'll get another 7th. That is our fate. And I think it kind of tells the story of it's an everyman's story. Be vigilant. Remember the lessons that you've learned throughout life. Um and life will take hits at you, and you need to piece yourself together, figure out what you did wrong, how you weren't able to avoid it, and try to come out of it stronger. And the nation of Israel, the country of Israel, is definitely coming out of this insane bloody nose, more unified and stronger, and looking to the future. But give it another couple of generations, and you'll have a generation that didn't learn the lessons we learned, and they'll tend to make the same mistakes, just like we repeated the Yom Kippur mistake, and the history will repeat itself. That's the way I see it. But there's also, there's a lot of hope there because it means it's cyclical, and there's day and there's night, and there's good times and there's bad times, and you in Israel you get both, and there is benefit in both. Smooth seas don't make a good sailor, as they say. I've experienced and learned and matured this year in a way. Drastic change happens due to drastic input, drastic forces. So this year was definitely drastic for me, and it was drastic for the nation. And I think that had we not been attacked on the 7th, we could have definitely eaten ourselves up from within. I mean, that definitely could have happened. I mean, the politics was in Israel was getting to levels like it was in the States during the Biden-Trump election or the Kamala Trump election. That's that's quite rare for Israel. We don't, Jews don't. I mean, we're divided. We can't agree on anything, but it's never gone that far, and it got that far, and we got that whack up on the head, I guess that we needed to wake up. Not that on the individual level anyone deserved any of it, they didn't, but as a nation we had it coming for sure. I mean, the writing was on the walls. Um, and so let's be stronger, let's be smarter. Let's give our kids the tools that they will need to, unfortunately tackle their peak of anti-Semitism whenever as it comes, because the anti-Semitism kind of comes and goes with the fashion, and now we're experiencing a high point, and it's going to be followed by quieter, better times, a low point, and I mean that high point is going to come again. So I guess we need to tell our story, and we need to learn that lesson. We need to try to fortify ourselves. But that next time's coming, man.
Before you go, what's a lesson you can share or a message you can share with the anti-Israel community?
Wow. So there's a bunch going on with the anti-Israel community. Some of it is what I like to call the Disney factor, where people automatically imbue righteousness on victims, or just underdog makes right, I guess. That is some of what's going on. Others of what's going on, as in the case of South Africa, which I know that you had a podcast on recently, in Ireland, is you have, and even amongst some of the African American community in the United States, you have people putting their personal experiences onto something that has nothing to do with the dynamic of what's causing whatever it is that's, going on in their life or happening with their people. A lot of it is misinformation. You know, people are emotional creatures as much as we try to be logical, and the images that are coming out of Gaza are are not great for anybody to watch. And a lot of people who don't understand intricacies of war and combat, take that to the wrong place and don't really understand what that is, and why that comes to be, and who's responsible for that exactly. So I don't have a really good answer for you, man. It's a very, as in a lot of points in history, you have a convergence of a lot of different groups and factors coming together to agree on the fact that the Jews are bad and they should be punished and eliminated. And I kind of hate speaking like this because I feel like it sounds like an oversimplification, falling back on anti-Semitism. But I feel like the vast majority of the criticism being and the vitriol being fired at Israel is due to a misunderstanding of what's going on. I'm all for criticism. I have criticism of my own. Um, but the general feeling that like the world is against us, our very existence, the very existence of a nation, of us having a country altogether, that's a very difficult thing to deal with, man. That for me personally, having been on the battlefield physically, but experiencing it in the realm that you are experiencing in the news or in the street. I have friends in the U.S. I have a friend called me a fascist, genocidal maniac. A good friend from high school. That sucks. Um, it sucks. It sucks that I even had to think about whether or not I was going to do this podcast with my camera on and off because of whatever kind of a feedback I'm going to get. It sucks that I had to very, very heavily measure a lot of my words throughout the course of this podcast because um, people are taking clips and sound bites and are looking for every justification um, to turn us out into monsters and to vilify us. Your listeners as Jews, if they so happen to be, and me, putting the uniform on, and you having put the uniform on at a point in your life, um, and that sucks, man, because I'm fighting for my backyard, and fighting for my home, literally speaking. Um, my house is 15 minutes from a spot that they could have attacked from. Um, and being labeled like the worst things people can think of labeling somebody in the modern era, that's tough. Being labeled a Nazi, that's tough for me. I've had Holocaust. My grandfather and grandmother from my father's side were partisans in Poland, and they met in the woods in Poland. My grandfather on my mother's side was in Stalingrad, like was in the Red Army from Stalingrad to Berlin fighting the Nazis. You know what I mean? I'm being labeled. That's a hard pill to swallow. Um, you try to ignore it, but you can't always. Um, and I'm sure that the vast majority of your listeners, if they happen to have a Jewish background, were raised on stories like that. It cheapens the word Nazi, um, which is a shame. Um, But okay, so something I ramble. I have a habit of doing that. Look, my lesson, and I just got hit with it, is live your truth, man. I mean, it sounds so new agey, but you need to do what's good for you, man. Because no matter what you're gonna do, I mean, try to be a good person. Try to take others into account. Don't be an ass. But understand that no matter what you're gonna do in life, you're gonna have detractors and naysayers and shit talkers and haters. That's just a feature of life. So, you know, in the context of what we spoke about, I mean, the fact that you're pro a nation or a country or a religion or however your listeners may interact with the topic at hand, if this is something that you support, if this is something that you are into, if this is something you want to get involved in, know that if you had gotten involved or supported or done anything else, somebody would have had something to say about that also. You know what I mean? It's like if you want to be philanthropic, then oh, he's like a bleeding heart liberal. And if you're not philanthropic, then oh, what does he not care? And if you buy the car, then like, oh, he's frivolous. And if you don't buy the car, then like, oh, he has no styles. Like, just if this is something you're passionate about, if this is something you identify with, there's consequences to everything, right? So I guess if you wear a yarmulke nowadays, have your eyes a little bit more open than you do usually. Um, but fucking own it, man. Own who you are. I mean, think about your decisions, give it thought, try to, it's not that, your shit won't stink. It will. So you need to have a mechanism to absorb criticism. Just don't think you'll ever get to a point where it won't exist. Because it will, always. Just look at Elon Musk. The guy built like a million companies and sending man to Mars. And like, you talk to somebody about him, he's like, oh, he's a bad father. Well, Gandhi was a bad father too. So,
Dan, I don't know if there's anyone else out there I respect as much as you. You were the
stop
biggest
it.
badass I met before this whole era, back in the day when we lived together in 2014.
Yeah, man. Cold, hard
Just so you guys
decade.
know, listening, Dan has the biggest biceps. He's the strongest guy. He's a
Well,
beast,
they're a little bit smaller than they used to be.
and
Yeah.
he's the nicest
Carrying
guy,
that
the
weight for
kindest
that
heart.
distance, it's hard to keep the girth. But look,
And
look.
and I reached out to Dan a week ago saying, "Hey, I'd love to interview you because out of all the people I know, I think you're really on the front lines in Gaza on a demolition team. You know more than most because most of my friends from the paratroopers are in Lebanon. They weren't sent
Lebanon's pretty
to,
intense, man. Lebanon's no joke.
of course, but they just are talking about Gaza. So you were the first person to come to mind when I wanted to
I appreciate that, man.
talk to someone. So thank you.
Look, but
So
there's always, it's funny that you'll know this, the guys who aren't in the paratroopers are always looking at the paratroopers, right? And then the paratroopers are always looking at the commando guys, and the commando
yes.
guys are looking at the Sayeret Matkal guys, but the Sayeret Matkal guys are looking at the pilots, and yeah, I mean, it's like So look, man, I'm just a guy who wakes up in the morning and does his best. And that's where you and I have a lot alike. And that's all you can really kind of ask of yourself. Just do your best. Whatever it is that your best is on that particular day. Like give it some thought, give it some planning, sweat a little bit. But like, you know me, I would work out and I would develop a sweat and maintain that sweat throughout the entire workout. That's how I measured how much input I needed. Just make sure that you're sweating on whatever it is you want to focus on that particular day, week, or whatever. Like have a goal, start climbing, do your best, and like screw the naysayers. If that's the hill you want to climb, man, climb it.
So I can't wait to re-listen to this, and I'm sure I'll
Oh
learn a
yeah, I
lot of
forgot half the
things.
stuff I said. Oh no.
It's really exciting, and I look forward to having you on the show again.
Yeah, that
Uh,
would be dope. Appreciate that.
And
Maybe we can
until
talk a little bit more businessy on your other podcast. I know you have another
definitely,
podcast
I'd
with
love to talk
Russell's.
about your work in the labs. That's really exciting.
Yeah, yeah. Israeli labs are very cool. There's a whole bunch going on. Investment opportunities, venture capital. I mean, there's a whole, Israel has a whole bunch of fighting going on, but it's got a whole lot else going on too. That's super interesting. That would be dope. I'd enjoy that.
Thank you, Dan.
Appreciate it, man. You have a good day. And thanks to all the listeners. You have a great day, man.